Welcome back, everyone. I'm Julie Flagstad, and this is the Midlife Truth Project, a special 9-part series aimed at unpacking midlife. Why? Because midlife is the single biggest, most explosive time in a woman's life, yet something we barely talk about. This podcast series is really designed as an audio journey, with each episode focusing on a specific midlife truth or transition. In other words, a midlife truth. Taz and I are calling today's truth Windows Open. It's the second episode in this 9-part series, and it's meant as a rallying cry for everyone listening. It's about the importance of reframing aging and letting the fresh air in so that we can foster a growth mindset and really become more curious and more intentional about what we want this next new chapter to look like. To help us explore this, we're welcoming none other than Chip Conley. Chip is the ultimate entrepreneur, visionary, and mentor. He's also a self-proclaimed midlife activist who's taken his decades of wisdom and experience from the hospitality space and founded what is called MEA, which stands for the Modern Elder Academy. It's the world's first wisdom school, and I can't wait to talk more about it. He is also a celebrated speaker, including several TED Talks, which are PS fantastic, and a best-selling author. His latest book is called Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age. It's an absolute must-read. So let's do this. Let's talk truth.
The most common signs of an aging neck are the development of vertical muscle bands, sagging skin, and excess fat deposit. It is important to pamper the area often neglected, the thinning, crepey skin of your neck and sort of this whole décolleté area, using a hydrating and smoothing solution that goes on with a cooling and massaging roller applicator. Women-S is the leading women's wellness brand that is modernizing aging through clean products formulated to meet the needs of your changing skin, hair, and body. They created the Let's Neck and the Décolleté Serum, shown to help instantly tighten and smooth. It helps firm and brighten over time with less sagging and crepiness. Their medical-grade stainless steel roller applicator cools and massages the skin and is formulated with unique plant-based ingredients. Women-S is available nationwide at Ulta Beauty, Amazon, and on womenS.com. Get 20% off orders of $50 or more by heading to womenS.com/midlife and use the code midlife20 at checkout. Women-S, live fully and age well.
So, Chip, welcome to the Midlife Truth Project. We are thrilled to be in conversation with you. And I can't kick this episode off without sharing a little story about the first time that I heard you speak and the first time I heard you share your story and this midlife crusade that you're on. And I know you can appreciate this because you have a dog. But I was walking the beach with my 2 dogs. It was kind of the dead of winter. It was gray and damp and cold. And you were being interviewed by Jonathan Fields on the Good Life Project. And I was just absolutely drawn in by the work that you're doing and your story. And you're such an incredible storyteller. And without sounding just totally woo-woo, I knew right then and there that you had to be a part of this project. We know that you are just like the perfect conversation partner to help us visualize, that this should be a time where we're opening the window and letting the air in and seeing life through a new frame, right? So we're thrilled you're here, and I just want to I want to back up, and I want you to tell us how you became fascinated with this topic and what your backstory is.
Yeah, well, honored to be here, and I love the work you're doing. So, and I really love the idea of it. There's truth in this, or what we really desperately need as a society is a roadmap for midlife. We have a roadmap for adolescence now, albeit, adolescents are going through a difficult time these days, especially due to social media. But the truth is that there's a whole social infrastructure to support people through their teen years, through the liminal period between adolescence, or between childhood and adulthood, and that's adolescence. There's a word that's not well known, which is midolescence. And midolescence is the adult corollary of adolescence. It's when we're going through all kinds of transitions, but we don't have a roadmap, and we don't have any social infrastructure to actually support people through this period. And so part of the reason that I've been curious about this and become a midlife activist is because I saw the downside of not having the roadmap. I lost 5 male friends to suicide, ages 42 to 52, during the Great Recession. I was going through a really hard time myself in my late 40s. Never heard about the U curve of happiness and the fact that, oh, yes, 45 to 50 or 45 to 52, 53 is, technically speaking, on average, the hardest time of adult life. But nobody told me that. Nobody told me what I was going through in my andropause period, with my male body changing. There were a whole collection of things that nobody told me, and for women, it's the same and even more. And thank God, menopause is having a moment that will be more than a moment. It will be a long-term plan where women are talking about it. So long story short is I felt the need to help create or to help illuminate, what are the things, the normal things that you go through in midlife, and how is it possible that maybe midlife is not a crisis, but it's a chrysalis? The
I
idea
love
that
that.
it's actually this period of time where there's a lot of transformation happening, and that can be painful. And yet on the other side of it, you may come out of this damn chrysalis as a butterfly. And the U curve of happiness research pretty much says that's the case. We get happier after age 50. And Becca Levy's work at Yale was always very illuminating to me as well, when she was able to say, if you can shift your mindset on aging from a negative to a positive, it gives you 7.5 years of additional longevity. And to that fact needs to be out there in the world. But it's not. And so my role really is to help create a platform for us to talk about midlife as not a curse, but potentially a blessing.
Can you share with us a little bit more, take us back a little bit as to what was going on in your life and, and how you moved through that?
Yeah. So I was in my late 40s and, starting around 45 or 46, and everything that could go wrong was going wrong. I have an African-American foster son who is an adult at that point, at that stage of his life. But he was wrongfully identified as, a criminal, and going to San Quentin for it. So I was having to fight that justice fight. It was the Great Recession. I was losing friends to suicide, which was really hard. One of them happened to be named Chip, one of my closest friends, definitely my closest friend in the world named Chip. And he was my insurance broker. And when you go to a memorial service for a friend who's taken their own life, which I had to do a few times, and they have the same name as you, and you're going through your own, dark night of the soul, that was crazy. It was, literally going to my own funeral. My company was struggling. I had a boutique hotel company that was quite big at that point. And I was running out of cash. I didn't want to be CEO anymore. I had a long-term relationship that was ending, not by my choice. And then I had an NDE. Then I had a near-death experience where I actually died
Oh my
9 times
goodness.
in 90 minutes because of an allergic reaction to an antibiotic. And it was after I'd given a speech on stage in St. Louis, and I thankfully was sitting and signing books. So all of that happened in my late 40s, and all I can say is that I just felt incredibly cursed. And part of the reason I had some suicide ideation was I just really wanted to escape this. I felt like I'd sort of created this life that wasn't working, and I was embarrassed by it. I was actually a little bit ashamed that I was in such disarray in the middle of my life. And I having had 5,500 people now come through MEA, that is a common feeling like, oh, I'm playing the game of life. Remember the game of life, that, that board game? And it's like a little American piece
I
of
think I have
propaganda.
it.
It's like there's one path in life,
Yep.
and you get tokens for your plastic car as you get married and have your first job and buy your first home. Well, I felt like I was playing the game of life wrong, and I was losing. And if you looked at me from the outside, you might not have said that, because I was definitely somebody who had a lot of success in my 20s, 30s, and early 40s. But that's what I felt like. I felt like a big old loser. And as is true for many men, I was having a hard time talking about it. So the NDE really got me to talking about it. It's like, okay, a little divine intervention came in, and my next thing was like, okay, I am going to change my life. And I did. And I really did. Over the next 2 years, everything changed. And then ultimately I sold the business at the bottom of the market. And 2 years later, while I was having my midlife atrium, which is a beautiful piece of language from Mary Catherine Bateson, whose mother was Margaret Mead and father was Gregory Bateson, the famous psychologist. She says that we need a midlife atrium to have light, air, and space to consciously curate the second half of our adult life. And I actually created that for myself between 50 and 52. And then at 52, the Airbnb founders 12 years ago, when it was just a little company that most people had never heard of, they approached me and said, will you be, shrinking the story, will you be our modern elder? I was like, I don't want to be your modern elder. Sounds awful. Sounds like I'm like old, like an elderly person. She says, no. A modern elder is someone who's as curious as they are wise. We want to tap into your wisdom at age 52, and the average age of the person here is 26. And the rest is history on that. And my 50s were great. I loved my 50s. And all I can say is I thank God I was patient enough to get to the other side of the chrysalis to see the upside.
I love the idea of light, air, and space. We're going to have to dive into that one a little bit more because, as you're speaking, I'm actually even thinking, Julie and I, we talk about women all the time, but I'm thinking about all my med school buddies. And one of the things, as we're all in sort of this phase, is there's a heaviness around them. There's a lot of darkness. They feel trapped. They feel stuck. And, I think men aren't really great about talking about this, just as like women have a lot of shame around, menopause and being considered menopausal and all these different stereotypes that we have. How do you think we got here where we are so misunderstood or so sort of, there's so much of a negative bias or negative sort of connotation around this phase of life? Is there a backstory to that? Is there a cultural reason that we've landed here? Because again, a lot of my background is studying Eastern systems of medicine and, holism and things like that. And they actually put their elders up on a pedestal, right? They were the center of a family. They were the center of a community. You would go to them. They would have family meetings, village meetings, tribal meetings. But I feel like in our modern world, you kind of have to hide a little bit, if you are going to admit that you're 40, 50, 60, and I'm so curious why you think we even got to this point to begin with.
When you fear death, being midway through your life is scary. When aging is perceived as a negative, then getting older, and in midlife, just as you get comfortable in your own skin, it starts to sag. So the reality is that
So
the physical
true.
body is more evidently aging. I think that, and if we think of society as like, oh, I'm going to be living age apartheid in my 70s and 80s in some nursing home or retirement community or wherever, you can see why people would look at midlife and say, man, if I can survive my midlife crisis, all I have to look forward to is disease, decrepitude, and death. But that premise is so off on so many levels. But it is the premise that speaks to the idea that, as we get older, our options in life decline, our happiness declines, etc. But there's a huge gap between that sort of societal message about aging and the personal one. The U curve of happiness research, for those who don't know it, shows that basically, yes, we do have a long, slow decline in happiness, starting in our 20s, although today people in their early 20s are not very happy either. So, but historically, it's been a long, slow decline from early 20s and bottoming out around 45 to 50. And then with each decade after age 50, you get happier and happier. So that's not well known. And there's a lot of reasons why this is one of the core pieces of curriculum we do at MEA, at the Modern Elder Academy, with people, is to help them understand what gets better with age. And that's a big piece of my book, Learning to Love Midlife. The subtitle of the book is 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age. So I think a lot of it is the dominance of a culture that has been very focused on beauty and brawn and the body. So the 3 B's: beauty, brawn, body. And in a culture, and partly because of movies, partly because of Madison Avenue and products. Products are often oriented toward younger people. And the products that are oriented toward older people are often anti-aging products, which are usually anti-women products. They are dedicated to helping mostly women feel badly about their natural process of aging. And so that's the landscape we live in. And there's a one last piece, around it, which is economic. And that is that 125, 150 years ago, we were an agricultural economy. And if you were an older person on a farm, male or female, you understood the weather. The farmer's almanac was really land wisdom and weather wisdom. And so the longer you were on the planet, the more you knew that. And so an older person, an older farmer was really valued. And then you go into the industrial era and people are on assembly lines, and like the older worker might not be as valued because it's physical labor often. And then you go to the technology era and like, oh my God, the older workers like thought to be, a Luddite and a digital immigrant as opposed to a digital native. And so if you see the economy's evolution, you can see that we have moved away from, what might have valued an older person, on a farm versus, I worked at Airbnb and a tech company, and I was so out of it in terms of culturally by being a boomer. On the other hand, they loved me. And they loved me because as a company, Airbnb started to realize, wow, if we can combine older brains that tend to have crystallized intelligence and think systemically with younger brains that tend to be fast and focused, and it's what's called fluid intelligence, then we have the best of both worlds. But we have a long way to go to have the business world see that, older brains should be side by side with younger brains.
And I wonder if you could share with us, your two things. Like one is what you took from that experience at Airbnb and becoming and how you leaned into being that mentor, because I think that's a big theme as we kind of transition into midlife, is how you grow into that role.
Yeah, I mean, there's Richard Rohr is one of our faculty members at MEA, and he's a famous Christian mystic. He's written 50 books, and he says that the natural process for us as humans is that we have an operating system of how we see the world that is really the operating system of our ego up until around midlife, and it can be healthy. I mean, an ego can be very positive in your life. It can actually help to individuate you, propel you forward, have clarity about, what's important and meaningful to you and what's best for you. The problem is often our ego gets the best of us and takes over our lives. And then in midlife, something starts to shift and we move from the ego to the soul, and the new operating system is the soul. But nobody told us that there's an operating system change, and there's no operating instructions for this soul. So and often what it is sometimes it's the screwy circumstances in midlife that, the divorce that you weren't expecting, getting laid off, having your parents pass away, being in sandwich generation, menopause, a bunch of things that get a person to a place of like, wow, I'm on my knees. I have just had some circumstances that have led to not the dark night of the soul, but the dark night of the ego. And I'm ready to actually press the reset button. And so the beauty of that is that it allows you to potentially take off all of these uniforms and this wardrobe of identities and roles you've had. Connie Zweig's book, I think it's called The Inner Book of Aging or something like that, Inner Work of Aging, talks about moving from role to soul as we midlife. And this is particularly true for women. Women wear more hats and are often.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Let me just have a moment.
Yeah,
Favorite guy ever.
Let's be clear. Women have more roles, juggle more things, are better multitaskers than men. And whereas men have sort of like, okay, again, I'm talking very traditionally here. Men have this role of being, maybe the provider in the family if it's very traditional. And then, so they sort of like the father in the family, and then they go to work. And maybe they do a couple other things. Maybe they're a baseball coach or something like that for their kid, but there's not many more roles. Whereas women have, the provider for the parents. on both sides, including on his side. Um, Again, I'm talking very traditionally here. Plus, they actually have a job. Plus, they actually take care of the family, and they're the homemaker while they have a job. And yes, they are a PTA president, and they're a political activist. And I mean, there's a lot, and women are able to inhabit those roles. But there's a point in midlife where you have to start looking at all these roles, and some of them the roles are archetypical roles or archetypical roles, like the caregiver or the hero or heroine or whatever. And you really need to look in midlife around like, is it time to dose down that role or to let go of that role? And so this is what happened. So for me for my personal story at Airbnb, I had been the CEO of my own company with 3,500 employees. I was the founder of that company. And for 24 years, I did that. When I joined Airbnb after 2 years of sort of a break, that midlife atrium, all of a sudden, I'm by far the oldest person in the company. I have the most experience, and I am mentoring the three founders, but I'm also reporting to Brian Chesky, who I'm mentoring as the CEO, and he's 21 years younger than me. So I'm reporting to someone 21 years younger than me who doesn't have the life experience I have or running businesses that I have. But I had a lot of respect for him. I really liked how his mind worked, and he was very talented. So I had to get to a place where I realized my job here is no longer to be the CEO of the company or have my, be on stage and have my, face on the cover of a magazine. My job is to be the CEO whisperer. I'm no longer the sage on the stage. I'm the guide on the side. And in so doing, I started to realize that my definition of success was helping Brian to be the best leader he could be. And to take a guy who, started the business when he was 26 and had never run a business before and had gone to Rhode Island School of Design. He was a designer, no business background at all. To take that guy and both learn from him as well. He taught me a lot, but also to help teach him such that today he is the CEO of a public company that's a Fortune 500 company that, for a while there was the most valuable hospitality company in the world. That's a lot. That was my new thing. So it's sort of like being a father. It's sort of like being, Erik Erikson, the famous developmental psychologist in the 20th century, said that as we get older, it's no longer about I am, my business card, or I am what I control, or I am what people say about me, or I am my stuff, or I am my body. It's I am what survives me. And that's the idea of like, I am here to be generative, to help generate things for future generations in a very altruistic mode. And that had to become my new perspective at Airbnb. And it was a beautiful shift because I really did feel a shift from ego to soul in that.
I want to go back for 1 second and then Taz, I want to pull you in here because like in this idea of being, generative, but also in this idea of this, like all these hats that are going on in this midlife period of taking care of your parents, of taking care of your kids, of working on your marriage if you are in a relationship, of focusing on your career where you might be at a pinnacle, all of these different hats that are going on at the same time. I wondered, Taz and I were talking earlier this morning about this idea of it feeling almost guilty that you're pulling time aside to focus on yourself during this transition and recognizing who am I becoming and where am I going? That's a very kind of selfish process in the midst of while you're, kind of managing all these plates that are in the air, right? And so Taz, can you talk a little bit about what you see in the patients and the mediocrity that we talked about?
Well, we were sharing this before we jumped on with you, Chip, and it's just this idea that women and men get stuck. And I think they get stuck in the hum and the busyness of all the responsibilities you already mentioned, the job, the kids, the parents, the finances, all of that other stuff. And oftentimes there isn't a catastrophic event or like an NDE of some kind to bring them to this like realization of like, okay, it's time to transition. Okay, it's time now. Let's put the ego aside. Let's move into this next phase. Instead, what happens, I find a lot of people, and this is what they tell me, settling. They settle for wherever they are. And that might be settling into a relationship that may not be 100% fulfilling, or into a job, that necessarily doesn't light them up or ignite them, but pays the bills, or a health condition that, they just are frustrated that they can't move forward, because health is a big part of this too. And, I had a patient just yesterday, she's going through a divorce, and I was, asking her how she's doing, and we were chit-chatting a little bit, and she was like, Taz, it's not that he's bad or he's mean or he's abusive. It's just that he's not involved and there's zero communication. And I can't imagine living the next 30, 40 years of my life in this sort of situation. She goes, I deserve better. She said that to me. She goes, I think I deserve better. I deserve communication, intimacy, being excited about the day, wanting to go to dinner, not the sort of like blank slate. But she goes, when you ask me what he didn't do anything. So she's struggling with a lot of shame and guilt about the fact that she's blowing up her family, filing for divorce, taking her son out of the home, all these different things. But I told her, we have to change. And if people don't change with you, what are you supposed to do? And I actually have that question for you too. Like, if you are realizing that you're in sort of this place of mediocrity as you hit midlife, what are you supposed to do? Do you blow up your life? Do you run away? Do you get a fake name? Like, what do you do?
Well, the old Hollywood trope is for men is you have your midlife crisis, you buy a red sports car and have an affair. But that is so rare. That doesn't happen like very much, except for Kevin Spacey in American Beauty. But the bottom line is what people need to get comfortable with. Dan Gilbert has a beautiful TED Talk, Harvard professor, saying human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they're done. And that is true for your whole life. So you're going through liminality, a word that a lot of people don't know. To be liminal means to be in transition between two things. And it's normal. It is normal. And so to actually be in a liminal state, it means you're alive. The question I like to ask at MEA with our students, our midlife students, average age of the person who comes to MEA is 54, and 64% are women. So it's a lot of people from all over the world, people from 50 countries. I like to ask the following question: what do you know now, or have you done now, that you wish you'd learned or done 10 years ago? And then once you got that in your mind, here's the more important question: 10 years from now, what will you regret if you don't learn it or do it now? And the reason that's a really valuable question is because anticipated regret is a form of wisdom. So for me,
say that again.
That's a big one.
Anticipated regret is a form of wisdom. And that's a Chipism. I like my Chipisms.
I like that
that
Chipism.
too.
That's a good one.
Yeah. So for when I moved to Mexico at age 56, I asked that question, and I had a mindset. Let's recognize that there's fixed and there's growth mindsets, and these are all the kinds of things we teach at MEA, and we don't even know if we have a fixed mindset, and we have them all the time. And my fixed mindset when I moved to Mexico is I'm too old to learn a foreign language, and I'm too old to serve. But when I actually posed it in this question I just asked, which is what will I regret 10 years from now if I don't learn it or do it now? In that what it did is it gave me a catalyst to break through the fixed mindset, break through the stuckness, break through the boredom, and say, you know what? I am going to learn Spanish, and I'm going to learn how to surf. And if I don't like it, I don't have to keep doing it, but I'm going to try. And when you move out of the fixed mindset to the growth mindset, you're moving from feeling like you have only a fixed amount of whatever you've got, whether it's money or talent or time, and you can't, do better. Whereas in a growth mindset, you focus on improving yourself and learning, and you're less self-conscious. You're open to trying things and being a beginner again. And being a beginner is one of the most important qualities of midlife and beyond, is trying something new. Because if you only want to play the games that you can win, your sandbox is going to get smaller and smaller, and you'll get stuck and bored. So I just think that that's a really key piece of this: learning how to be liminal, learning how to become a beginner again, learning how to move from a fixed to a growth mindset. and really getting comfortable with the idea that you can make some major changes in your life. One of the beauties of getting older is you start getting some time affluence. You do move to a place where your parents have passed, your kids have moved out of the house, and they haven't moved back yet. Which, like, let's be honest, like, this is a huge issue.
Right.
Is moving back or never moving out. It's an issue that didn't exist 30 or 40 years ago to the extent it exists today. But you have more time in your life, hopefully. And with that time gives you the opportunity to either sit on the couch and watch 47 hours of TV a week, which is what the average American retiree does.
So scary.
Yeah, scary. Or to say, like, you know what? I want to focus on something that I loved cooking pies with my grandma as a kid. And I'm a litigator and I'm 60 years old and I'm a woman who does not want to do that anymore. And I am going to go to pastry chef school and I'm going to start a bakery and become an entrepreneur as a baker. And there's a litigator who came to, a woman who came to MEA in our Baja campus, not in our Santa Fe campus where I am right now. And that's exactly what she did. So we really do need both new thinking, new questions, and then support community that actually helps us. That is one of the hardest pieces for a lot of people is if you are stuck and your husband is stuck as well, when one of you tries to break free from the stuckness and open up the life so it's a little more interesting, the other one who's stuck may feel like you are betraying them.
Because right. Talk about that.
You're changing the system dynamic. The system dynamic is we all have our roles. On our own, we have a different role than when we're in the system of a family, for example. And John Bradshaw did work on this a long, long time ago. And the bottom line is, a system can confine you. And when you feel like you want to liberate yourself, you have to look at what are you going to do to help the system change. And this client of yours who is recently she's getting divorced. My sense is that that's where she is she wants to liberate herself from what feels like a bit like a jail. And she is in jail with her husband, and her husband seems to be content or has settled for that condition and is unwilling to break out of the jail. And therefore she has to. And she has to do that with her kids because frankly, her kids will, even though in the moment have a hard time with it, maybe they will look back and admire their mother for having broken out of jail.
Since we're talking about the importance of friendship as we age, community is such a big part of that conversation too. Finding like-minded women to lean on during midlife can help all of us feel more connected and definitely less alone. Women Us is one of my favorite go-to women-owned companies because they're all about encouraging women to embrace every chapter of life with grace and confidence. They're also about empowering women with not only products, but also valuable resources, content, and yes, community. They even created a private Facebook group called The After Party. It's an incredible private community sharing all things midlife for women who are 40 plus. So join the party by signing up on their website. And don't forget that Women Us products are available nationwide at Ulta Beauty, Amazon, and on womenus.com. So go check it out, and you're going to get 20% off orders of $50 or more by heading to womenus.com/midlife and using the code midlife20. That's midlife20 at checkout. Women Us, live fully, age well.
Is there a way to bring somebody along as you're growing and expanding and trying to reset this? Is there, I almost feel like just like a midlife roadmap, there almost needs to be a marriage roadmap, like in these points of expansion and contraction.
Or friendship, even if you're not married.
Yeah, exactly. Or friendship,
or your kids.
Business, any of it. What's the roadmap for that? Like, how do you not feel like a sledgehammer to somebody, right? But at the same time, you love somebody enough that you want them to come along for the ride, or you respect them enough that you want them to come along. Is there a way to go about that?
We have so many people, mostly women, who come to MEA and then they go home and they said, I'm sending my husband, or I'm sending my sister.
Right. Right.
Or sending my best friend. but that's not the only way to do it. There's Arthur Aaron is a New York NYU professor, and famously came up with the 34 questions that you can ask someone else to build a more intimate relationship. If you want to just do a Google search for Arthur Aaron's 34 questions, you could sit down with your husband and say, you know what I'd like to do is let's take, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 questions a night over dinner, and we'll ask each other the question, and let's see where we go with this, and like what it opens up. And so yes, there's therapy, there's all kinds of other things you can do, but sometimes it's as simple as having a conversation. Now, if your husband is not open to that, then okay, then maybe, I know one couple, and the husband was not open, but they had a best friend other couple where the husband was sort of a role model. He was sort of like, and so the smart wife of the husband, who was just like not open to this, started saying, hey, we love this other couple. Let's once a month go out to dinner with them. And so they started doing that. And the 3 of the 4 with that one husband not knowing it, knew that they were going to script the dinner in a way that was going to allow the conversation to go deeper than normal. And it actually helped, because when the husband saw the other husband being vulnerable and open to sharing, and they didn't talk anything about the Arthur Aaron stuff, but they knew some questions that were going to be asked. And what it did was it gave him the comfort that he could actually be masculine, but break away from the mask.
And also be vulnerable.
I
so
love
I want to
that.
step back and kind of rewind for a second. This work starts with yourself, right? Like you talk about the growth versus the fixed mindset. And regardless of the relationships that you're in, whether you're married, you're single, you're with your friends, you're with your parents, your children, whoever, they have to begin to shift their mindset first before they can begin to bring others along for the ride, right? And so one of the things I was really sat with me when I was reading your book, which was, by the way, fantastic. So thank you for writing that. Is there's a quote in there, and I'm going to read it. And I've really started to practice this, and I would love for you to talk about it. And I've shared it with a lot of people. So anyone listening who knows me knows I've said this. Is between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And this is it. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. It's so great. Like there are moments in this, and you talk a lot about transitional intelligence. There are these moments where I have asked myself, like, this is a moment. I'm going to choose between whatever stimulus it is, whether it's my partner or my child or my employer. Like I'm receiving a stimulus. And I have a choice right now in terms of how I'm going to respond. And in this response, I'm either going to grow as a person or I'm not, right? And it's really powerful. And I feel like that is in part this transition, this moment where you're seeing the atrium, you're seeing the light, and you're like, yes, I'm going to respond in the right way, And I wonder if you could dive a little bit deeper into that for those listening. Is how do we lean into like that growth mindset?
I'd like to piggyback on that too, because you mentioned, and I want to come back to that light, space, and air. And I feel like that kind of tags on to what Julie's saying, as we're trying to first begin this journey with ourselves, and for anybody out there listening, and they're hearing us, but they're still not 100% sure how to lean in or how to start. How do they create light? How do they create space? How do they create air? What is that journey for them, that they can start to begin?
So it doesn't require you to take a year or 2 years of your life. You may not have that space, but you could take one weekend day. You could allocate even once a season, one day on your own. What would you do with that? What would give you that space and that light and that sense of openness, so you could actually allow yourself to be a conduit for something to come through you, including big, beautiful ideas of how you want to curate your life? So it doesn't require a gap year. It doesn't require, I mean, part of the reason people come to MEA is it's a 5-day program. And it's like, that's the investment they make in themselves, knowing it's going to be a huge transformational catalyst for them. So, but it doesn't have to be something that takes too long. The thing that in that quote that Julie brought up though, is it's about the pause between stimulus and space, between stimulus and response, there's a space. So the question is, what do you do in that space? First of all, for most of us, when we're younger, there's no space. As we get older, our EQ tends to grow on average, as does our emotional moderation, which means we are less reactive. We are less the pinball in the pinball machine. But the question is, what is it that we do that helps us to create that space, the pause? And so one of the things that I just love is the idea of flow. And Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi popularized the concept of this, and he was a bit of a mentor to me. And how do you find flow? And it's usually in that flow. And to use the language, the theory is basically, if you can find things in your life that give you a sense of timeless awareness, that you are so in the moment with it, that you are at one with the activity, that is healthy for you. It gives you a sense that you are in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. And so getting clear in your life about what are those things that give you a sense of timeless awareness is very helpful. Because when you are maybe really agitated with something, how do you go and do that? How do you go? For me, what are the things that give me flow? Hiking in nature with my dog and asking the question before I go on the walk, nature, what do you have to teach me today? Writing. I love writing. I'm a writer. I've written 7 books and I have a daily blog. I'm like, okay, I better like writing. And I do. And when I'm writing, I have a sense of timeless awareness. Meditating. For me, meditation is a form of that. Now, there's lots of things that are not. I don't go into flow. I don't go into flow in yoga. I don't go into flow in cooking or gardening. Maybe I will someday, but right now, nope. So, but cooking, gardening, surfing, these are things that might give a person a sense of flow and might give them that sense of the space between stimulus and response. So whether the space is a gap year or whether the space is literally a 10-minute meditation, or this idea, these two questions sort of strung together that you've asked, it speaks to this idea that how do you break yourself out of your normal routine? Malidoma Somé is a African thought leader who's recently passed away, and he says that the difference between routine and ritual is, with a ritual, you are willing to be altered. And so how do we find those rituals in our life? How do we find practices that we might not think of a practice? Cooking might not think of it as a practice, but there's all these Buddhist monks who think of washing dishes as a practice. And if you actually look at washing dishes as not a routine, but as a ritual, how might you approach it differently? And typically it means like you are just more in the moment doing it right now, not thoughtlessly, not mindlessly, but with a sense of mindfulness.
Breaking the routine, again, this episode we're calling Your Windows Open, is like breaking that routine is like opening the window. Like it is saying, I choose to open this window and let the air in and see the world, or today, or this week, or this trip, or this dinner, like through a new frame, and I think, and I just want to add one more thing. I've started to, I've not gotten very good at it, but you talk about journaling. You've talked in the past about, what did I learn this day, or what did I learn this week, journaling. And that also is a totally interesting practice in terms of really reflecting on something and saying, I learned from that.
So let's talk about that practice for a second, because it's a form of journaling, but it's a subset of it called wisdom journaling. And it's something that I created 35 years ago for myself, and now I do it with our students. The idea is this: every weekend, I mean, you don't have to do it every weekend, but that's how I do it, and I've been doing it for 35 years. You spend 20 minutes over the weekend, 20 or 30 minutes, and you reflect on your week personally, professionally, physically, emotionally, relationally, etc. And you say, like, what were some of my biggest lessons this week? What did I learn from that lesson? What was the situation that led to a lesson? What did I learn? And how's it going to serve me in the future? And what you do by doing that is you are metabolizing your life experiences and turning it into wisdom. So as I've said earlier, your painful life lessons are the raw material for your future wisdom. And if you know that your life lessons are meant to be guides for you about becoming wiser and learning how to cultivate and harvest that wisdom and then share it with others, it's really valuable. And so I do that, with my leadership teams. I did it at my boutique hotel company, at Airbnb, and now at Modern Elder Academy, where once a quarter we sit down as a leadership team. And you can do this with your family as well. And each person says, here's my biggest lesson of the quarter. Here's what I learned. Here's how it's going to serve me in the future. And then at the end, after each person has done that and talked about it, and we get to learn from each other, wisdom is not taught, it's shared. So when I hear someone else's wisdom across the table from me, it's like, oh my gosh, I just learned something. Hopefully I don't have to have that same lesson because I just learned from you. And you could do that with a family too, say like, okay, or as a couple. You could say as a couple, hey, once a quarter, we sit down and say, what was my biggest lesson in the context of this relationship, this marriage? And then the other person does it, the spouse does it. And then what was our biggest collective lesson as a couple, beyond our personal lessons, and how's it going to serve us? And so that's really what wisdom is. Wisdom is understanding your life experiences and turning it into something that has value moving forward. And that's why you could have a 30-year-old who's wiser than a 70-year-old, because the 70-year-old has never metabolized their life experiences. They just keep making the same old damn mistakes. And a 30-year-old could be like, you know what? In my teen years, here's what I learned. And so it's all about the raw material. The older you are, the more raw material you have.
I love that this idea of opening the window and letting the air in can be so simple, right? I think many people think they need a sabbatical or, some sort of grand gesture to do this. But these are questions you can ask at the dinner table. These are conversations that you can have with the people that you love or the people that you work with. And I'm even thinking about our family, Julie, I don't know about you, but I'm like, we're probably going to do this tonight and like try this out and see, of course they're going to be like, Mom, you're so cringe. Why are you asking me these questions? But I think there's so much that is practical on a growth strategy or on a journey of trying to get through this phase of midlife. I actually think it's one of the most exciting phases of life. I think you can take all the bumbling around of your younger years and maybe crystallize it into something that's really meaningful. And I think I personally just want to cheerlead people that are listening or people that come to me with like, you can do this. This is not that difficult. What do you see as the biggest hang up for people as they're hitting this phase of life? What is the biggest thing that blocks them? Because maybe somebody listening will be like, okay, I need to let this go.
It's their mindset. It's the water that a fish is swimming in that they don't realize is water. And so a coach, a therapist, could help. Changing your diet can help. Changing where you live. Your habitat often influences your habits. When someone moves where they live, that helps. If you drive to work, driving a new way to work is helpful because it's actually changing. You're seeing things with a new pair of glasses. So much of it has to do with changing the routines and the rituals, turning, just ways of your habits into practices, and looking at your life as having some intentionality around it, as opposed to just being a default. We're having this conversation, obviously it will air later during the week of Burning Man. And I was a founding board member of Burning Man. And Burning Man uses the language, the default world. And part of the reason people come to Burning Man because they don't want to live in the default world. What does that mean? It means you want to actually not default to the way the world wants you to be or the way you have been. You want to actually press the reset button and say, I don't want to be in my default mode. I want to be in the mode of like, okay, I'm open to trying something new. So the biggest thing to answer your question is mindset.
I would just add that when you say intentionality, I think there's the saying, and you've said it before, is like, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? And by the way, it doesn't have to be physical time, right? Like when you're driving, you can be listening to a podcast. You can be absorbing content and information and themes that are going to kind of help you along your way. And the other aspect of that being intentionality is, I often say to the women that I speak with is that, when we say yes to something, we say no to something else by default, right? If I say yes, I'm going to chair this board, it means that I don't have that enough time to do something else. If I say no to something, like I'm not going to go on that 3-day weekend with those set of girls because that's not serving me and where I am in my life right now, I'm by default saying yes to another opportunity that may come, right? And so it's this idea that we have to begin to really ask ourselves, who am I? What is important to me? And what am I going to do? How am I going to follow the breadcrumbs, to get me towards where I want to go, and in that intentional way, which I think is powerful for people to, like, you have the power, the atrium. I know we only have a few minutes left, and I want to kind of close with this visual of, how you see the atrium. And I also want to talk just 2 seconds about the Modern Elder Academy, today's wisdom school, because it's so important for our listeners to understand specifically what your 4 pillars are and whatnot. But so if you can put that in the context of the atrium, because it is a visual that I think is so helpful for listeners.
And when Mary Catherine Bateson said this about the atrium, she said, we're living longer, but the way society looks at it is as if we've built 2 additional bedrooms in the backyard of our life, meaning we're just old longer. And she says that's just not true. You're just in midlife longer. And I, by the way, I think midlife lasts 40 years, 35 to 75, but that's a whole different thing. And I write about that in the book. And so if you're in midlife longer, what she says is, instead of adding 2 bedrooms to the backyard of life, what if you just created a new blueprint for your life, such that in the middle of your life, you have this air and space and light. And that really was in many ways a catalyst for me to create MEA, the Modern Elder Academy, so that people could have a place to have their midlife atrium, even if it's only for 5 days. And we have people who come and they're at the start of a gap year and they come to MEA, but almost everybody who comes is working, and many of them have kids at home, and they're coming for the reason to have their own catalyst. It's like, I want to look at my life differently. We're the world's first midlife wisdom school because we really are dedicated to helping people make sense of what they've learned along the way and repurpose it for the rest of their life. The actual themes or the pillars are the idea of how do we reframe our relationship with aging. Again, Becca Levy's work. It helps our longevity. It also helps our happiness. How do we navigate transitions? Because we go through so many transitions in midlife. How do we cultivate purpose? And purpose is one of the most important variables for living a longer, happier life. And then how do we own our wisdom? And this is particularly important for women. Men tend to own their wisdom and they have bravado around it and they mansplain. But women are almost embarrassed by their wisdom. They're almost embarrassed. And I'm talking generally, except for when they get into their 50s. There's an interesting study from Harvard that showed that men, when they hit their 50s in their career, are plateauing and starting to feel irrelevant. Women are feeling more confident. But how do we help women own that wisdom and share it? And so that's really the third piece. The fourth piece, because we are moving out of the knowledge economy, because everything's knowledge now. Like ChatGPT is just basically aggregating knowledge. So is Google. But wisdom is becoming, is trending. Wisdom is becoming more and more important because it's the human side that balances out that artificial intelligence. And the kinds of wisdom that includes ingenuity or empathy or creativity or having values. These are things that machines have not figured out yet. But they're things that humans know very well. And when you think of a wise person in your life, a role model, someone you admire, someone who's been a mentor, when you ask, what are the qualities that you most admire about the person? They're almost all human qualities. They're not about how smart they are. They're not about how many achievements they've accomplished. They're often about, the fact that they are a great listener. They ask great questions. They have a certain faith and confidence in your ability, etc.
Taz, Chip, there's so many more.
So many places to go with those. Yeah,
that we can go. I don't. You have to go, but we have to ask you one last question, which is, what is your midlife truth?
My midlife truth is that it gets better in your 50s, and it's that simple.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your work. Thank you for the lives that you're changing, the ripple effect that it's having. And I am coming to MEA. I cannot wait. I'm obsessed also with the idea of generational dinners, which we didn't get a chance to talk about. So I'm hoping that maybe this can be the beginning of future conversations.
Love it.
Thank you.
All right. What'd you think?
Oh my God. No, he's just at the pinnacle of soulful, I can really listen to him. He has so much wisdom and insight, not only from his own journey, but also from founding the Modern Elder Academy and all of the, 5,000 plus people who have been through there. I just think that there's so many gold nuggets to take from this episode and apply. And that's why this was such a good on-ramp for the episodes to come. Like when we think about the atrium, when we think about opening the window and letting the air in, and it's important for the episode that we're going to have on, families change and how changing family dynamics, as well as sex and intimacy. Like it is so important to kind of put a new lens on how we view these things because it can change, it can alter like whether we go left or right.
Very much. And I think a part of, like we talk about the midlife truth, right? A part of midlife truth is, how are you going to take the mask off, right? How are you going to open the window? And are you going to do it by tackling your relationships, your own personal growth, your intimacy, and your sex life, your health? These are all pieces of the puzzle when it comes to charting change, and they all kind of need to come together. Doesn't mean you have to do it all at one time. But I think for everybody listening, like, where are you going to start? I think is the question.
I love charting change. I've never heard that before.
It's a journey, right? And I hear this all the time. Like people come in and I want to information dump on them, right? And they're like, oh my God, this lady's too much, But it's not so much about that. It's about, of all the things on the table, right? What's your starting point? Just start somewhere, But if you start somewhere with any of these, your friendships, your personal mindset, your health, one change leads to another. It's almost like a series of dominoes. And before you know it, you're curious and you're expansive and you want more. And, the whole thing with time just goes back and you're in the flow. And I think that's a lot of my motivation for what I do. And I know it's like what you're hoping for as well.
Oh, 100%. 100%. It's all about the growth mindset, the people you're surrounding yourself, and following the breadcrumbs.
Totally.
It's what you call it dominoes. I call it breadcrumbs, tomato. Like
yep.
it is this idea of know that the work starts with you. And that one thing will lead to the other.
To the next. Exactly.
All right. Yeah. Because again, each one of these episodes is supposed to be about a transition, right? And so
right.
You can't tackle them all at the same time. All right, friends.
Right.
I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Have a good day.
You too. Take care.
Thanks for joining us today. And we can't wait for episode 3 of this 9-part series called You're Not Crazy, It's Hormones,
where we'll be unpacking what's happening in our bodies in conjunction with perimenopause and menopause. Our guest is longtime OBGYN, author, and chief medical advisor for Alloy Women's Health, Dr. Sharon Malone. See you soon.